Hello, and you're listening to Your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Hey there, Eric here from Socially Awkward Studios, and this Four-Eyed Radio presentation is being proudly brought to you by Raven Designs, illustration and design that fit your personality. For samples and inquiries, visit ravencruise.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my work, 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley, from Cinema on the Rocks, and with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios, and you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. Yes, this is where we discuss bondage, James Bondage, all kinds of bondage, and today we're going to specifically be looking at the literary side of the James Bond universe, and we're going to be discussing 3 of the novels written by Ian Fleming, his second, third, and fourth. We're going to be talking about Live and Let Die, Moonraker, and Diamonds Are Forever, none of which very much resembles the movies that were made with those titles, but hey, at least one of them is kind of, sort of close, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, there's a couple of similarities there in one of them. The other two are way different. I mean, besides a couple of character names here and there, it's almost completely different stories.
Yes, but before we get into the novels, I thought we'd try some reasonably current events about Ian Fleming. Story that came out just at the end of March of this year, and this year's being 2014, depending on when you're listening to us. Miracle of the interwebs. I have no idea when you're listening to me. I can just tell you you're not listening to me while I'm recording this because we're releasing it later. But anyway, Ian Fleming had a love affair going on once upon a time in the 1930s, and his lover was from Austria. Her name was Edith, and some of those letters are now going up for sale, and they reveal some interesting things about Mr. Fleming. The same person whom we discussed in an earlier episode had James Bond deciding that missionary was the only position for him, because of course he couldn't properly make love with his elbow being hurt, which of course just makes sense to none of us. Now, on the other hand, in You Only Live Twice, when he saw a sex manual, he said, hey, let's start from page 1. But he was not supposed to be in his right mind then, so we're getting mixed messages here. However, it turns out that Mr. Fleming himself may have had some sadomasochistic tendencies. Quoting from one of these letters, translated from the German, he says to his lover Edith, quote, otherwise, I will say nothing more to you. Only that I blank you. If I were to say love, you would only argue, and then I would have to whip you, and you would cry, and I don't want that. I only want you to be happy, but I would also like to hurt you, because you have earned it in order to tame you like a wild little animal. So be careful, you.
And she continued having correspondence with him back and forth. She was obviously into it as well?
Well, a lot of people are, and hey, if you are, you're a consenting adult, I hope and assume. So whatever floats your boat. And if you find this material interesting, it can be yours for only £47,500.
Oh, is that all?
That's
I'll take
all.
2, please. No. Wow.
And if you're looking for a quick conversion in United States dollars, that's roughly $78,700.
That's a lot of dough. I could buy a lot of really nice things for that, and not just old letters. Old penthouse letters from Ian Fleming. Although it would be a cool conversation piece. I mean, certainly. But, wow. It'll be interesting to see who forks over that kind of money for that kind of memorabilia. It's not not your typical James Bond memorabilia that you'd want to just frame and put around your house, I suppose. Unless you have a special room for that. I would imagine actually
that the person who buys them would do exactly that.
Well, yeah, they probably they most likely have a special room for that. Probably downstairs.
Not necessarily. I mean, you never know. Some people may put this in their living room, maybe in their office. Who knows? But hey, if you buy these letters, let us know, and we're curious.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to talk to you. We would be glad if you purchase one of these letters. If you spend $78,000 on a Ian Fleming love letter, we would love to interview you, to talk to you, and we'll put some of your audio up on the show. That's how we can repay you for that. Yes, because we certainly don't have $78,000 handy.
No, not at the moment. Anyway, give me a week or two. No, not really. But, so, that's what's going on in the world of Ian Fleming, and letter written about 15 years before he penned the first Bond novel. And we discussed that once upon a time in our Origins episode, Casino Royale. So, without further ado, let's move on to his second James Bond adventure, Live and Let Die, which bears a passing resemblance to the movie that was named after it, but not to worry, at least 2 other movies also lifted elements out of this book eventually. So what were your initial feelings about Live and Let Die?
I think this was one of the harder Bond books for me to get through reading. It took me a while because I kept putting it down in different times, and a lot of it was just as we discussed, even with the movie, just the blatant racism that's going on here. It can get really tough, and even looking through the lens of, okay, we know who wrote it, we know when he wrote it, we know when it's set. It's not that it's entirely inappropriate for the time. It's only mildly inappropriate for the time, but it's wildly inappropriate for this time. So it does get hard to read in place. It is a good story, it is a good book, but it is definitely not up to date with the current political world that we live in, and so it can be real tough to kind of put that aside and continue pushing through the book.
Yeah, here's a drinking game I do not recommend that anyone try unless they are really, really hoping to drink to forget. That drinking game would be take a shot every time Ian Fleming writes the word Negro. You won't even make it 30, 40 pages in before you are in the hospital with alcohol poisoning.
Yes. I was about to say, that's a good way to kill yourself with alcohol poisoning. Maybe instead of shots, maybe just a sip of a beer. That way you might make it to chapter 4. Yeah.
And the thing is, as Eric alluded to, looking at the time when this was written, the word itself is not objectionable. It's the common frame of reference term, right or wrong, and some people even consider that a correct term nowadays. But that's not the problem. It's the overall portrayal. And it's not even accurate for its time, and it's wildly preposterous even for people who do have racist attitudes for its time. Because basically what Fleming has decided is that, okay, we have the standard myth of the black monoculture, which we all know isn't true and never was. But, okay, that's the standard time period buy-in, fine. However, his idea of the black monoculture in America is that every black person in the United States subscribes to the religion of voodoo. Every one of them. There is no such thing as a black Christian, black Muslim, black atheist. Nope, they are all subscribers to voodoo, and not only that, but they are all scared shitless of it. And if someone says they're a voodoo priest, then every black person in this book will be their slave. And I'm not even exaggerating. That is exactly how Fleming portrays black society in this book. And that's what gets to be so hard to take, because he's basically treating everyone like mindless animals.
Yeah, it gets quite rough at some points. Like you said, he uses the word Negro quite often, an immense amount of times. But he also uses the other word that is has always pretty much been offensive. I don't think it was ever a fully acceptable term. That's used quite a bit as well. And that's when it's kind of like, geez, easy there. Even one of the chapter's titles. So it can get a little bit rough, but if you get past that, the story is a really good Bond story, and it's one of the more plausible ones as far as, if you take it, set aside the voodoo aspect for a moment, the actual plot line of the movie or the book is a little bit more realistic than the movie.
Though I will say that as an idea, the whole voodoo thing isn't so bad, and I really enjoyed how it was worked into the movie.
Yeah, I think they played it much better in the movie because it was more of this is a small group of people who happen to subscribe to voodoo, as opposed to this is just what we assume every black person in America does.
Yeah, and I think this is yet another example of what a fantastic job Eon Productions did whenever they adapted something, is they squeezed the best out of it and made something better. And it's so rare when you hear the phrase, the movie is better than the book, but in most cases with these books from Ian Fleming, that's true. And again, it's not that they're bad books, it's just that the translations just make something better out of them. But before we move on to the meat of the book, there's just one line that just, my jaw hit the floor when I first read it. On the subject we have been discussing. This is from Felix Leiter, who is teaching us a very valuable life lesson in this book. And it's a lesson we all should heed. Personally, continued Leiter, I like Negroes. Wrote a few pieces on Dixieland jazz for the Amsterdam News, one of the local papers. Did a series for the North American Newspaper Alliance on the Negro Theater, about the time Orson Welles put on his Macbeth with an all-Negro cast at the Lafayette. I know my way around Harlem pretty well. So, just the phrase, I like Negroes.
Personally, I'm cool with them. I got a black friend, I'm not racist, obviously.
And of course, the life lesson here is, it's good to like Negroes. Why? Because when later on in the book the Negroes start beating you up, you can start talking about jazz with them. And because you talk about jazz with them and can say nice things about Duke Ellington, they won't kill you.
That's pretty much how it works, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty legit.
That is exactly how it works in the book. And just the blatant phrase. And the sad thing is, you hear it even now. It's just flip the word Negro for gay.
Yep.
I like gays. How about we just try this? And this is something else that stood out as I'm reading every time Fleming uses the word Negro in this book. He never, when he's talking about a black person, just says man, woman, person. It's always Negro or Negress. Whereas talks about a white person, man, woman, person. Never like in the movies, honky or whitey or cracker or anything like that. So it's just a very telling dynamic, I think, as you're reading the book.
It really is. You do get that impression that he really does kind of... And you get it from the author level. It's not from any one character. You do get it from the author level. You pick up that the person behind the words maybe doesn't have the best happy feelings for this particular group of people. And I'm not sure if it's ever been explained why. There's quite a few biographies on Fleming that I have not yet read, so maybe it's explained somewhere in there where that comes from, but I haven't read about it yet, so I'd be interested to know if there's something behind that, or if it's just one of those weird, quirky, natural things that just happened.
Read from all this stuff of his that I've read, I think it's just the racial British superiority that was unfortunately epidemic of the time that came before him that he seems lost in. Because I think that in many ways, he's something of a relic even in his own time, in terms of his attitudes. But, as you pointed out, when we look past those attitudes, very interesting adventure story.
Yes, it is. And, like I said, it's a little bit more realistic. You have basically, he's investigating gold smuggling. And it turns out to be just gold smuggling, not a master plot to take over the entire world. It's not anything like that. It's not where, you don't get these crazy master plots that you get in the movies, which do make the movies fun and interesting, but take away the realisticness of it, something fierce. In this one, you don't get that. You get just a good action-adventure story, and it really does play out quite well.
Yeah, however, it's gold smuggling that it makes sense that Bond would be sent to investigate it, because the idea is that the gold that is being smuggled, because the movie took out the whole idea of gold and replaced it with drugs, and also just left it at drugs and didn't make it anything more specific. In the book for Live and Let Die, the idea is that Bloody Morgan, as in Captain Morgan, as in got a little captain in you, Captain Morgan, same guy, that his pirate treasure was discovered. Now, of course, it's been kept on the QT, but the reason they think it is because they're noticing that these gold coins are starting to circulate. And what they've uncovered is that the gold coins are being excavated and then sold by a Harlem gangster, Mr. Big, the Negro. And what he is actually a financier for the Russian Smersh, which is, of course, Bond's arch enemy in the books.
Yes.
Spirinon, death to spies. And so, because this is a British treasure, because it's being salvaged from the British Indies, and it's being used to finance Soviet intelligence, that is where Bond comes in investigating it. However, since this is being smuggled in America, he has to come across the pond, and he meets up with his old friend from the CIA, Felix Leiter.
Yes, and I love Felix's portrayal in the books much better than in most of the movies, especially since in the movies he seemed to kind of jump around a bit as far as his portrayal, not just actors-wise, but I mean they seem to make him a different character each time. But in the books, he stays pretty true to himself, and it's a good character. I enjoy him.
Yeah, and he's a very folksy American without coming across as an ugly American, which I think is very, very difficult to do in terms of whenever I see this portrayed in a book, especially when written by someone who isn't American, there's that happy medium where you want to get the folkiest version of the character without going overboard and turning it into either a parody or a slander. And that is one of Fleming's strengths as he writes these books, especially comes out in Live and Let Die, is that he can make Leiter a very folksy American, went straight for Texas, and he's got that whole Texas thing down, but he's still a real person. He still makes sense.
He's not Jack Wade, is what we're
saying. God,
no. Yeah, you really get that impression that, I'm not sure if Fleming based him on anybody in particular, but you do get kind of this impression that maybe that was kind of based off of somebody who's maybe Fleming's friend.
Could be. It wouldn't surprise me. That I don't know. But I really do like how he's written. And, hey, he's teaching us life lessons. But just whenever he talks, he's just got his dialogue, even more so than Bond's. It flows the smoothest out of any of the characters that Fleming writes. It's just the most easy conversation, easy one to hear in your head without having to do any manipulation of it. Though, with that said, he and Bond, frankly, really, really start to dive in their taste in alcohol. I mean, you know what they're drinking throughout most of this book? Ol Grandad. Go in your local liquor store, folks. Go in the bourbon section. Look for the Ol Grandad.
Nope.
It will not be at or above eye level.
Nope, not there. Lower. Nope, lower. Nope, lower.
Right about where your knees are.
See where the bottom shelf is? Look underneath that. See if they've got a storage area underneath the bottom shelf. Because that's where
it's not quite there. Both places I went, and actually by my own experience, frighteningly enough, it's not quite the bottom shelf. It's the one right above it.
Does it come in a glass bottle?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so it's not the true bottom shelf then, because you know when you hit the plastic bottles that you've hit the true bottom shelf.
No, but this is cheap bourbon. And you have Leiter and Bond drinking it and ordering it by name.
I think it might be one of those situations like how Americans think that. What is that horrible beer from Australia that everybody thinks is the
Foster's?
Foster's, yes. If you go to Australia, they think of Foster's as that's the Bud Light of Australia. It's gross. It's horrible.
I used to have Australian neighbors, and they would gag whenever they saw a Foster's commercial.
Exactly, but everybody here who doesn't know is like, oh, Foster's, it's Australian beer. It's good stuff. Maybe it's a situation like that. Maybe just clever marketing of Ol Grandad in Britain made them think that it was better. And
yet Fleming actually traveled to the United States. So, on the other hand, he was relatively ignorant of what black culture was in the U.S. So, hey. But this actually, the Ol Grandad thing actually reminds me, and this scared me. I have a friend who once toured Germany with a basketball team when he was in college. And he said that the beer of choice when he was going through Bavaria amongst the Germans was Bud Light. They loved Bud Light. And he was just, you are the capital of awesome beer, and you are drinking this piss water.
That's just horrible. That's awful on so many levels. Like, first of all, I think it's awful that anybody drinks Bud Light ever. But specifically, if you're in a place that's known for good, real beers, and you choose, that hurts my feelings a little bit.
It hurt mine too.
I'm gonna write a strongly worded email to somebody. I don't know who. But yeah, besides, it's kind of weird when Bond's in Britain. He's very classy with the drinks. The Vespers created in Casino Royale, for example, which I don't think I've mentioned on the show yet because I hadn't actually tried one previously on any previous recordings, but I recently did get all the necessary ingredients and made myself a couple of Vespers. Not really my thing. It was okay, but not really my favorite beverage ever. I ended up tweaking the recipe until it was more like it ended up being more of a...
He kept cutting out the gin.
Yeah, I kept reducing the gin, increasing the vodka. I ended up adding some lemon juice to the actual drink itself, not just in the garnish, and I bumped up the Lillet content to add a little more sweetness. So I ended up with essentially a lemon drop with a little bit of gin in it. And it was good. It was tasty.
Well, how many did you get? What were you on the fourth when you finally decided you liked it from what you told me?
Yeah, I think that was number 4. So it could have just been that my taste buds were dead at that point. But as far as from previous experience with martinis, I will say that was probably the best martini style drink I'd ever had, other than like an appletini or something like that, which doesn't really count. But I'm not a big fan of martinis to begin with, so that doesn't really say a whole lot. But I had to try it. I had to try it at least once, and so now I can say that I have, and I did, and I probably won't again.
For me, I will say that it is the cleanest martini I've ever had. I mean, it is just super, super clean. And I very much appreciate that there are no olives involved. I just can't stand olives in drinks and olives in general. I like olive oil in Italian cooking and on bread, but as far as the actual olive or putting it in my alcohol, stay away. So I like that it's a martini that doesn't involve that. So I really enjoy the cleanness of the Vesper. And yeah, it's pure booze. I mean, it is pure booze, but that's okay. It's very smooth. And as long as you're not making it with bottom shelf, it's not the kind that's going to make you feel like hell in the morning. You make it with bottom shelf, you're asking for pain. Yeah. But so really don't cheap out if you're going to make a Vesper. Use decent gin, use decent vodka. And if you're into martinis at all, I think you'll like it.
Yeah, if you're a martini person, I'm sure would be very good. I'm just not much of a martini person, so it didn't work out great for me. But like I could recognize that it was a good drink. It wasn't like, what is this? But it was very gin heavy, especially the first one that I made to the recipe. And I'm not a big gin guy, so that kind of I should have known better. But at the same time, it's like one of those things I had to try it at least once. And I'll probably do it again. I still have the Lillet sitting there and still have plenty of the gin left because I haven't drank that with anything else either. So I'll probably end up making it or something similar again, just to get rid of my supply. But Yeah.
It's a chore, but somehow you'll manage.
Exactly. But it is interesting that when Bond is in Britain, he's got such this high class taste for alcohol, and then he comes over here and drinks that Ol Grandad. And I wonder if that's an effective, clever marketing on the part of whoever's behind Ol Grandad. Similar to the Foster's analog that we talked about.
Hey, anyone listening in Britain, how's the reputation of Ol Grandad over there? Let us know. In fact, do let us know. We're really easy to get a hold of. You can email me at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. You can also find me on Twitter at cinemaotr.
I'm on the Twitters as well. You can find me at Eric J. Dewey. Also, don't forget to follow the 4-Eyed Radio Network at 4eyedradio.com, and we're on Twitter at the SasquatchNet. And, of course, you can email me directly, eric@4eyedradio.com.
And don't forget to find this show on the interwebs at hermajestiespod.com.
Twitter is at hermajestiespod.
And now you know how to find us. So find us.
Yep.
Hooray.
We're even on the Facey Books, the Facey Spaces. It's just facebook.com/hermajestiespod. I try to make it as easy as possible when setting up everything. If you just remember Her Majesty's Pod, you've got the web address, you've got the Twitter, you've got the Facebook, and you even get the email. I mean, I've even set up the emails. If you forget the other email addresses, I'm Eric at hermajestiespod.com too. So it's easy peasy.
Yeah, we try and make it not difficult. With that said, now that you know how to get a hold of us,
do it.
Another thing that I like about Live and Let Die is that you actually see some process of investigation as opposed to things just falling into everybody's lap. I mean, we actually have Bond and Leiter doing a pub crawl throughout Harlem, which hey, sounds like fun because, think about it. Going to all these really cool jazz clubs, listening to some good music. Okay, so you're drinking Ol Grandad, that's against you, but other than that, and they're doing it for a purpose. They're trying to find Mr. Big, trying to learn about his organization. So I like that there's some kind of investigation. The fact that it involves bar hopping makes it all the more fun. And the trick booth is not something that they just invented for the movie. It actually happens in the book as well.
Yes, I did notice that. That was a great scene when, they're specifically being sent to this table, and they ending up in the basement or in the special room.
Though, of course, they are not at the stage side table listening to the singer. No, they are at the stage side table watching the stripper.
Well, you got to do what you got to do,
For England, James. For England. So after we go down into the basement, and Mr. Big, who is shown as being rather sophisticated, but he's also the prototype of the I am going to yap at you and yap at you and yap at you when all I should be doing is putting a bullet in your skull. Because at the moment that Bond meets Mr. Big, he should be finished. He should be done for. Instead, Mr. Big just yaps and yaps and yaps and yaps. And he, to his credit, he gives a reason for not killing Bond. He says, one, he thinks it'll bring too much heat on him, but most importantly to him, and I think this is telling to the character, it amuses him to leave Bond alive. Now, he says that he would like to see Felix Leiter roughed up to the point of death, which is why, of course, it's a good thing that Felix Leiter likes Negroes and he can talk about Duke Ellington. Because since he talks about Duke Ellington to the enforcers, they only pretend to beat him up.
Yeah, they knock him out, but that's it, instead of beating him within an inch of his life, which was what was actually requested by Mr. Big.
Yeah. And we also meet Solitaire, and she does her truth-saying, and she falls in love with Bond instantly, so she lies for him. But Bond does end up with a broken finger, not hacked off, just broken, and we find out later that, and this just floored me, even more than the elbow in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Bond later decides that he can't properly have sex because he has a broken left pinky.
I think you may be stretching for excuses there, buddy. You having little problems there? I mean, this is obviously pre-Viagra days, so maybe he's just like,
maybe
oh, my
too
finger,
much Old Grandad.
My finger, I'm not going to be able to do it. Sorry about that. You know how it goes. They say the left pinky is tied directly to the other parts. So, yeah, that was a little bit weird, I should say. But yeah, it was a very interesting scene, though, because you do get that kind of monologuing, bad guy who's just going off and going off. But you also do get a completely different... In the movie, you really get this sense that Solitaire might actually have some sort of ability. They never really say it 100%, but they make it. They obviously Mr. Big believes that
and she does too. And to be fair, she completely believes she does.
Yes, and that's the other part of it that you don't see in the book. In the book, it pretty much it's just Mr. Big that believes it. Everybody else, because she admits to picking and choosing who she says is lying or not based on whether or not she thinks they're good people or not. She's just basically, just based on whether or not they're good people, and then, tell Mr. Big what he wants to hear based on that, basically.
Yeah, and Mr. Big also makes it clear that while he uses the idea of voodoo to his advantage, in fact, his thing is he has built himself up to be considered the zombie of Baron Samedi. So the character whom we see as a separate person in Live and Let Die, the voodoo spirit of the dead, is actually supposed to be Mr. Big. Mr. Big is his legend is that he allowed the spirit to come into his body, so he is his living zombie, and that's how he controls every black person in the Western Hemisphere, because they all believe that he is the god of death. And so all he has to do is leave a totem around, and that's considered sufficient watch because he's still there, allegedly. And he doesn't have an alternate secret identity as a government minister or anything. Nope, he's just Mr. Big.
He's content just being Mr. Big and Baron Samedi. He's good with just those two identities. He doesn't need another one.
Yeah. So it's very straightforward from there. After Mr. Big decides to let them go, he then goes about his merry business of loading up more gold and getting ready to sell it for the benefit of Mother Russia. And this is where it almost seems too easy, and yet because of the way the writing goes and the way the plot's flowing, it still works. But if you step back and think about it, it just gets it gets really simple. Bond and Solitaire, because Solitaire decides to defect from Mr. Big, because after that 2-minute meeting, she's decided, I'm in love with Bond, and Bond is going to get me out of here, so I'm going to place a phone call from a payphone while he thinks I'm getting my hair done, and I'm going to ask him to please, please, please let me run away with him. And, of course, he does, and they get on a train bound for Florida, because that's what they do. And, of course, he can't have sex with her on the train because his pinky's broken.
Well, when you're doing it on a train, it's very important to use your... No, I got nothing.
Yeah. And so, of course, there's this whole conspiracy involving that, all train porters are black, and all people who work in the transportation industry in the lower paid positions are all black, and they're all in the employ of Mr. Big. So there's this conspiracy to try and kill them there, get the train riddled with bullets. But of course, Bond was smart enough to get off early, thanks to a warning from the one decent black person you'll see in this whole book. And I use that term just to describe the way Fleming wrote it. And of course, that person has to die for his pains. So then they go to a cheap motel. Man, whatever happened to the Bond who said, I would rather stay in a morgue? Because I just can't see James Bond in a cheap motel. And I think this is another way in which our definition of who this character is has less and less to do with who the character started out as and more with how he's been adapted for the screen. Because, can you see any of the Bonds in a cheap motel? Any of them?
No, it's... no, not really. I mean, even Craig's Bond, when he was, living on the cheap, was still in a really nice place. It was a, not a fancy, high-tech place or anything like that, but it was a, obviously had its own things going on. It wasn't just a cheap place. So it would be very hard to see them, pulling over for a Motel 6 or something like that.
Yeah, and then we get into aspects that are not recognizable anymore from Live and Let Die, the movie, but this is where License to Kill picks up. Because it turns out that the way that the gold is being smuggled from the Indies into the U.S. is at the bottom of fish tanks for rare and exotic fish. And the henchman there is a character called the Robber, and his analog is Milton Crest from License to Kill. And so they go to investigate the warehouse where we have the Robber, and Felix ends up getting captured, and he ends up getting inside first. And this is where he disagrees with something that eats him. So that was not invented whole cloth for the movie. He really does get eaten by, come on, Eric, say it.
It's a shark. He got them, the shark. The evil henchman known as Mr. Shark got... Oh.
Sharks are not henchmen. You decided they were gadgets, remember?
Dang it. Son of a gun. Damn it, I want my cake and I want to eat it too. But no, yes, we do get sharks in this one. I mean, we don't really get to see the sharks very much. It's just a matter of, oh, this happened when he was there. And then later one of the bad guys gets it the same way. But you never actually see the sharks so much. But it's still cool that they're there.
And it is the first shark to show up in one of Fleming's books. So, hey, sharks. So that's where that comes from. And then later on, the keel hauling scene from For Your Eyes Only, that is also taken from Live and Let Die. And except for the fact that I don't think that in the movie, Bond ever had any intention of trying to drown Melina Havelock. Whereas in the book here, Bond decides that if it looks like they're going to end up hitting the reef, he's going to drown Solitaire first. What a lovely man.
Well, he's got good intentions behind it. He's not like, I'm going to drown her to save myself. It's more of a just, hey, we're both going to die, and it would be less painful, I guess, for her to drown than to be cut to ribbons on the reef. But really, I don't know. Drowning is a pretty awful way to die. It's supposed to be one of the most terrifying ways to die, and you end up, But I mean, honestly, once you're dead, you're dead. So is it really that sparing?
Yeah, but once we get over to the Indies and we have the search for the treasure, we'll see this recycled a little bit in Thunderball, I think, because to me, it kind of read similar to, okay, now we have to find where they hid the bomb. So I noticed that, and Thunderball was written later, even though we've discussed it already. I just found that I just noticed a similarity there. So I think that Fleming, as he was trying to come up with the hiding the bomb thing, I think that he lifted a little from his own work there. Did you catch that? Or
I think so. I mean, I won't say that I caught it while I was reading it. I didn't really, try to leap forward to the other stories to see things like that. But now that you're talking about it, I can definitely see that.
But overall, I think the adventure played out well, as long as you can look past all of the cultural Neanderthalism. And that's not really fair to Neanderthals. It's being more and more shown that they were actually probably pretty smart. But what were your overall impressions? Was there anything else that jumped out at you that you wanted to go over?
For me, this one was one of the easier stories to get through, as far as it wasn't too complex. It was very, it flowed very easily. It was harder to read because of the cultural Neanderthalism that you spoke of, especially since the copy that I had was not changed. I know when they republished it here in the United States, they changed some of the language. Chapter 5's title specifically. They made it a little more PC. Instead of being N-word heaven, it was changed to just 7th Avenue. So things like that, when you come across an entire chapter in the book that's just titled that, you're kind of like, whoa, what am I reading here? I was always afraid, I'm like, somebody's going to look over my shoulder and think I'm a really horrible person. But
I actually had that kind of experience once with a book, and this is something that you'll never really get with an ebook. At least it's much harder. I remember when Robert Harris's Fatherland first came out, and for those who don't know, it's an alternate history book, and it's basically a police mystery that takes place in 1960s Germany, assuming that Hitler won. And so you have this German police detective who's trying to solve a case and ends up coming across evidence of the Holocaust. but the cover of the first edition paperback book is a gigantic gold swastika. I mean, like reflective material and everything. So here I am reading this book with a giant gold swastika showing out at everybody.
You're just like, hey, what's up? Hey, how's it going? Hey.
I got some interesting looks.
That's when you want to go back to your middle school days and make a book cover out of a grocery bag or something.
Can't really do that with a paperback, though.
Yeah, it's tougher. It's tougher.
But sorry to interrupt. You were saying.
No, it's just that's my overall impression was that the actual story itself is a very easy read. However, there are some things to get through that make it a little bit harder to get through. But as far as the actual book itself, as far as literature, it's very, very easy. It's not, it's not going to tax your brain. It's not a book that you're going to have to think about. We've never claimed that any of Fleming's work was deep intellectual literature. That's not the point of an action adventure novel. But this one especially, it flowed very well as far as, from one chapter to the next. You really got the impression. You didn't want to stop at the chapter breaks. A lot of books, they tend to wrap things up at the chapter. With this one, I didn't get that feeling. I kind of wanted to keep going straight through the chapter breaks and just keep on trucking. So it flows very well.
Yeah, it's a very easy read in terms of the story. I read it in 2 sittings. You can finish this in a day, 2 max. So as long as you could get past all the cultural material, it's a good read. So with that caveat, recommended.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend reading this one. Like I said, watch out for, if you're especially sensitive to that sort of thing, be warned. It's not awful. It's not, really, really rough. It's just, one of those things is you're just like, ooh, really? He said that again? Could he stop
and again, and again, and again?
But it's nothing, completely out of the realm of readability. So I definitely recommend it.
Yeah. And now moving on to the third Ian Fleming novel, and one which, except for the title and we got 2 names, one of which is James Bond. Okay, 3 if we're going to include M.
Yeah. M, was Moneypenny in there, maybe? I don't remember.
I think she may have had a quick appearance. Okay, 4.
They mentioned Blades, so there's that.
But it has absolutely no resemblance at all to the movie that took its name. So, unfortunately, there are no Zomji lasers!
Pew, pew, pew.
And there's no space station, but there is Moonraker.
Yes. This one is, as you said, completely different from the book.
How about from the movie?
I mean, the book is completely different from the movie.
The book is completely different from itself.
It is.
Zen.
That's how good it is. Yeah, like you said, basically we have Hugo Drax. Okay, so far so good. We're in the same realm as the movie. We have James Bond. All right, good job. We have a rocket, not a spaceship, not a shuttlecraft or a shuttle. Definitely no space station. We also don't have a plot to take over or to destroy the entire world and repopulate it with just his perfect people either. We just have your basic revenge plot where he instead of the craziness that is the Moonraker movie. Now I'm going to say I liked both. I liked the movie. Obviously we talked about it before. One of the funnest Bond movies. One of the most ridiculous plot-wise. The book plot is a little bit more believable. A little bit. I mean, it's still a little out there, but it's out there in the realm of possibility as opposed to just being way out there.
Yeah, and it's also very, very much stuck in its time. And I think that that's part of why you had to adapt it, besides they were thinking outer space is cool. So they were just looking for an excuse to put Bond in outer space in the late 1970s.
Yeah.
But in this book, it is very much stuck in its time. And for a lot of people, it may be just a leap to realize that certain technologies are not that old. Because what the Moonraker is in this book is an intercontinental ballistic missile. And it's not even a long-range one. It's what today would be considered a medium-range ICBM, something that just 10 years later, after this book was written, would be causing crises between the United States and the Soviet Union, and almost starting World War III over some missiles in Cuba. But this is the development of that missile, the short to medium-range ICBM. And what the idea is that this prototype rocket, the Moonraker, will ensure British security, because once it has been proven to work, then they can say, okay, yo, Soviet Union, Iron Curtain, Smersh people, if you are going to attack Britain, we now have a missile that can hit the capitals of the Eastern Bloc, and you don't. And we can put a nuke on top of this, because America's our friend, so they've already given us this. So watch out. So they consider it their ultimate deterrent. And this is something that we just take for granted as, okay, everyone's had nukes since the 1940s, but that's not true. It's something that developed afterwards, because the first nuclear weapons were delivered by bomb, and missiles were still being developed throughout the late 40s and 50s. The V-2 rocket was basically not really what we would consider a modern missile. It was just basically a bullet with an engine at the back of it. That's it. It was nothing like a modern rocket with a real guidance system. So this Moonraker, while it seems old technology to us, was really super high tech then.
Right. All the more reason they had to change the plot of the movie, because it wouldn't have held up even when the movie was being made. It really wouldn't have. People have been like, why is this a big deal?
It wouldn't have even held up when the first Bond movie was made.
Right. But at the time of the book, it was new emerging technology. So sometimes you end up, and going back and reading it, yeah, obviously looking back, it's kind of like, oh, well, no biggie, because now everybody's got them. But at the time, you really do have to look at this book through the lens of when it was written, because otherwise the plot makes no sense. But doing so, the plot is very feasible. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility, like the movie is.
Yeah, and the idea is that, okay, London, the government in London is getting this missile. However, it is not being built by the British government. This is not a project that began with the military or with the civilian government. Instead, this is a private gift from a millionaire. And so basically, we have this British tycoon, Hugo Drax, who has made his money in aerospace and done so just since being injured in World War II, because as far as everybody knows, he started off just as a longshoreman, ended up in the army, got injured, came back from Germany and made his fortune. So he's not just a British tycoon, but he's also very popular with the public because, hey, one of our boys came back and still wants to do more for the country. How patriotic. How wonderful. And you have to try and ignore. And I admit, this is one of the two biggest sharks for me to jump in this. Sharks. But it's the idea that, okay, you have this person who wants to make a private donation, says, I know how to build a rocket for you that will do this. So what I need for you to do is allow me access to a bunch of German rocket scientists. We'll get back there in a moment. And give me a nuclear weapon to put at the tip of this thing, and I'll build it for you. And you just have to let me do it under my own supervision. We're not going to do this on a military base. This is on my own private estate. And we're not going to surround it with soldiers or anything. My project, my money, totally private. Yep, private, private, private. And Ayn Rand fans are saying, yeah! But of course, we all know that this is not going to turn out well for anyone. So instead, basically what you end up having now is Hugo Drax, British millionaire, building a nuclear missile under the supervision of one above-board agent from Scotland Yard and one undercover agent from Scotland Yard. No military? What? Really? Did that strike you as odd as it struck me?
Yeah, seems legit. I think it's one of those things where just this guy had managed to build up so much trust that they thought he could do no wrong. They really thought that this guy was, King Dingaling, basically. They just thought that he was the best thing to ever happen, and basically whatever he wanted, he got. That's what it came down to.
even people who build jet fighters get real military guards for their facilities. Mm-hmm. So now, as far as the German rocket scientists go, I think anyone who knows anything about history or at least the history of space science understands that both the Soviet and American space programs were not really the Soviet and American space programs when they started. They were the continuation of the Nazi aerospace programs. It was just a matter of the scientists that the Soviets captured and the ones who decided to surrender to the Americans first. And then through what everybody now knows as Operation Paperclip, the American government decided to whitewash any Nazi ties that most of these people had and allow them to emigrate to America. And of course, we then have the most brilliant rocket scientist possibly ever, Wernher von Braun, the man who designed the V-2 rocket. You know, the rocket that did lots and lots of damage to London and other parts of England. Yeah, he's the guy who built the Saturn V that took us to the moon, and every rocket before that, too. So the idea of German scientists being used to build rockets is not unusual. The thing that struck me as just incredibly dumb, and Fleming, as a former intelligence officer, had to know this, is that between the Soviets and the Americans, they somehow left 50 brilliant German rocket scientists alone, still in Germany, for at least 5 years, long enough for Hugo Drax then to go back to Germany and collect them and say, hey, want to come work for me? Like, really? And that not only did not the Americans take them, not the Soviets take them, but no other government decided to snap them up? Really? I don't think you could find a qualified old school rocket scientist in Germany for at least a generation after that.
Yeah, definitely. It should have been, picked clean. But, for the sake of the story must go on. So he had to find some. He found some that were hiding really, really well, evidently.
And then, of course, all of his former friends, because, as we find out, Hugo Drax really wasn't a longshoreman. No, he was actually a German saboteur who was going to blow up the camp that he ended up being discovered in. He was just wearing a British British soldier's uniform as a disguise, but then some other Germans attacked the camp while he was in it, and so he faked amnesia. And hey, when they were trying to figure out who he was, the name Hugo Drax came up, and his name is actually Hugo von Drasch. Yeah. Wow. How coincidental. So that's the name he picked.
He's like, hey, that fits. That works. I like it. Yeah, it works well for me.
And so, instead of wanting to create a master race of human beings to take over the Earth after he destroys it, he instead is an unrepentant Nazi who still believes in the superiority of the master race of the Third Reich. And he recruits 50 other Nazis who somehow manage to be left alone and have rocket science experience to build a nuclear missile, which he says, we're going to use this to protect England, but actually he intends to have its first test flight go straight for London, which he then intends to annihilate.
Yeah, he's got this. He's got all the backing from the government that he hates. He builds the rocket. They think he's putting scientific instruments in the rocket and crashing it into the ocean to just test it. And instead, he's got a Soviet-supplied nuclear bomb that he's got in it instead, and plans on flying it right into London.
Yeah.
What a mean man.
But the thing is, as stupid as we're making this sound in terms of these two huge sharks being jumped, as an adventure story, it plays really well. I enjoyed reading this book.
Me too. I did enjoy this book. It was a little I didn't expect it to be so different from the movie. When I first picked it up and started reading it, I thought that I had a feeling it was going to be different. I didn't think that they were going to be, exactly the same, but the level of difference shocked me. So it was quite a bit different, but still good in its own right. And I definitely recommend reading this one. It was a fun adventure story, and it's kind of amusing to go back and think that the only reason he was foiled at all, the only reason London didn't get blown up by a nuclear bomb, was because M was playing cards with him and thought he was cheating.
Yes, but we'll get back to that in just a moment. I'm going to do this book in reverse.
Okay.
Because as Eric suggested, the book actually has two parts. The first not quite half involves meeting Hugo Drax as a card cheat. And then the second, just a little more than half, is the actual, we're going to blow up London with a nuclear missile plot. And since we started with that, I just want to finish with that part first. And we don't have Dr. Goodhead. Darn. Aww. I really like Dr. Goodhead. I do. We all know this. No, instead we have Gala Brand, who is the undercover Scotland Yard agent who is working as Drax's secretary, who fortunately can do the actual calculations for how to calibrate the guidance system on the missile in her head. So she's able to figure out that the calculations are wrong once she gets to see the ones that Drax is really using. Of course, that doesn't happen until almost too late. But the other thing that strikes me as I'm reading this is that this is another case where Bond is utterly ineffective. He never figures anything out for himself. And even when all of the evidence is staring him in the face, he not only doesn't see it, but he deliberately ignores it. Even though his instincts tell him not to, he deliberately ignores it. The only reason Bond wins is because basically Gala Brand tells him to. Bond is a totally ineffective agent as in terms of the missile plot in this book. Now, did you get that impression yourself?
Yeah, just a bit. There was so many times when he was still kind of going back to the, okay, that could be explained. Maybe he just does this because of this, and maybe it's the stress of this, and, I'm still going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was still, for far too long into the story, he was still willing to give Drax the benefit of the doubt, and it wasn't until, it was blatant in his face that this was a bad guy that he really realized it.
Yeah, and he didn't find that himself. He had to have that handed to him. The one time that he does any investigation on his own, it just gets explained away, and he goes with it. And so that didn't work out as well, but he is incredibly effective for the first half of the book, where he successfully and very quickly not only figures out that Drax is a card cheat, but he figures out exactly how he is cheating, and therefore how he is going to cheat him back.
Yeah.
Because the way that we originally are introduced to this whole thing is that M is at his club, Blades, and they have a problem with a member, Hugo Drax, who is, of course, being lauded in the headlines as this great British patriot who's going to do this wonderful thing with the Moonraker so that London can be defended and England doesn't have to worry about attack because we'll have the ultimate retaliatory weapon at our hands. And yet they suspect that Drax is cheating not at Baccarat, not at Chemin de Fer, no, at bridge.
I was gonna bring that up. I mean, I have never played bridge, and I think I learned more about it reading this book than I ever wanted to know. But
I'll admit, I associate bridge with old folks' homes. I mean,
my wife's granddad played a lot of bridge for quarters at their home. So yeah,
Ol Grandad.
Luckily, he had better taste than that. I never saw him drinking any of that. But
yeah. So Bond. So M calls Bond into his office and says, "I've been approached by the management at Blades, and they don't know what to do about this problem because if you expose him as a card cheat, his reputation is pretty much shot, and we can't really afford that kind of political fallout.
Yeah.
And we need to know, one, is he cheating? And if so, is there a way we can deal with this?" And he knows Bond is an excellent card player. And apparently he picked up card sharpening skills for a previous mission before the books were ever done. Of course, that's why he got the job for Casino Royale, because he is... Card Sense Jimmy Bond! They don't actually say Jimmy, but Bond actually uses the term card sense. I was eating at the time. I almost spit out my food when I read that.
Like, no, you didn't. Yeah, when I came across that moment, I was like, it's great. But yeah, it's a really interesting situation. Basically, you have a guy who, if it wasn't for the fact that he cheated at bridge and did so in a club where reputations are pretty much everything. Basically, he's going in there. Basically, they want to figure out if he's doing it because they don't want him to be exposed randomly. They don't want him to just be caught randomly because then they got to kick him out. They got to do this, and it brings this whole scandal down. So they want to find out if there's a way to sneakily get him to stop, basically. And that's where Bond comes in to come cheat the cheater, so to speak.
And he figures out that... I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I know. I was just going to say is I remember the other line that struck me from this part of the book was the Benzedrine and champagne. Never again.
Yes, benzos and champagne. But again, this illustrates the point we just made when we were discussing Live and Let Die. On British soil, Bond is drinking well. He's drinking scotch and water. And water, but he's still drinking scotch. And he's drinking champagne. And not cheap champagne. He's drinking nice champagne. Okay, he's taking Benzedrine with it. But he's drinking well. And of course, he is intentionally trying to look drunk without being drunk, hence the Benzedrine with the champagne, so that he can make Drax overconfident, because he's figured out that Drax is cheating from the fact that he has a highly polished silver cigarette case, which he happens to lay down on the table so that when he is shuffling and dealing cards, he can see the cards as he's dealing them, and therefore remember what he's given everybody else so he knows what they have. So he only has the advantage when he deals, but that's once every 4 hands, so that's all he really needs.
Right. And the rest of the time, he is a good card player as well, so he obviously, wins sometimes just, for real as well. But yes, the cheating definitely helps him out, and that's what makes it, everybody realizes, like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on?
And of course, we find out that the reason that he does it, even though he's so rich, is because he hates the British aristocracy. These Untermenschen. Sie Teil! So, it's just another way of sticking it to the man.
Yeah. It's a very well-written scene, I think. Even though I didn't know much about bridge, it wasn't too overloaded. It wasn't like in some of the, it wasn't like in the Card Sense Jimmy Bond, where they had to go through every step teaching us how to play the game. He didn't attempt to teach you bridge. I did not leave the book knowing how to play bridge. But it was written in a fashion where you understood the flow even without understanding the game, and it was a very good scene.
Like, if you understand another card game or two, you can probably fill in the blanks.
Right. Yeah, as long as you know basically what cards are, you'll be able to follow along the story, even though it's very heavy. If you do know the game, I'm sure it's very well written as far as, as we've pointed out before, whenever Fleming writes about a game, he's always writing it from a very knowledgeable perspective. And so if you know that game, you can follow along and be like, yes, that's exactly how that should go. So I'm sure it's the same with this. I can't vouch for that 100% because I don't know, but I'm assuming that if you follow bridge, if you are a bridge player, you would follow along with the scene and know exactly what was going on.
And then the scene where Bond does ultimately cheat the cheater, I love how that plays, and Fleming makes it play with such drama.
Yes.
That actually, to me, is the strongest action scene in the book, even though it's just guys sitting around a table.
It's definitely the heaviest, I don't want to say drama necessarily, but the tension of whether or not he's going to get out of it and get done the job, even though the consequences of getting the job done seem much smaller at this level. You get that sense. He even, when he starts the game after he's had the Benzedrine and champagne, he's feeling overconfident himself, and he realizes, he's made I made a mistake. I overplayed my hand because because of the Benzedrine, and now I've got to dial it back. And so you have this internal struggle as well as the actual game itself. And yeah, it is just a brilliantly written scene. So much so that you're into it. You have that intensity of what's going to happen, and then at the end you're like, wow, yeah, all right. And then you realize, you look back and you're like, wow, I just got really invested in a bridge game that I wasn't even playing. That's pretty amazing.
It is. And I also find it kind of hilarious that the management at Blades told Bond, no, you keep the money that you just won. You have more than earned it, and, we're happy to take it away from Mr. Drax. So he's allowed to keep the winnings. And what does he do? He immediately decides he wants to get a new, sportier car. And it's a damn good thing because before he has a chance to do it, he wrecks the one he has already. So at least he can afford to replace it right away.
It's convenient. Yeah, it's good that he got the money before everything else went down, because otherwise he might never have gotten paid.
Yeah, and it's another one where you have the spend the money quickly type thing. And the other thing that struck me as odd is that Bond is called to investigate Drax's operations after the other above-board person they had there was killed, and Drax accepts him just the day after, as if nothing ever happened, and that anyone ever expected that this would happen. That was odd, but again, because of the way the story is written, it played well, and I accepted it.
Yeah, you really, it's just very well written. I mean, the whole book, in fact, like you said, we discussed the, some of the points of Bond not necessarily being as Bond-like as we'd like, because he's not the one that figures everything out. But at the same time, it's just a very well written story, and like we said, much more realistic in the basic plot line than the movie itself. But very good in its own way, and I wouldn't even compare these, like we said, other than the title and a few characters, there's really no comparison between these two things. So whereas we've been saying before, whether the book was better or worse than the movie, for this one I say they're just completely different. They're both good. So read the book, watch the movie. Doesn't matter which order, because they're two different stories altogether.
Completely. And there's something else I do want to go over with this book that happens in the early portion. You get more of an idea of what life is like just in Bond's day-to-day. And he's describing, how he lives for the mission and everything else is just kind of boring. But you get the actual few moments where he's at his desk, paperwork, the inbox, reading really boring crap, which is basically how he describes it. And you also find out in the 00 section, there are only ever 3 at a time. Now, of course, the movies changed this because we saw a gathering of 00s and there were more of them. And what's more is that it's not a matter of, okay, we had 003, 004, 007, 004 was killed, now we need a new 004. Because the way that we have it here, it's 007, who is the longest tenured member of the section. And then we have, I forget if it was 008 or 009, and then the other one is 0012. So it's not just a 3-digit number. It goes up, and they're not replaced. And they all share the same secretary, but they don't share her for anything else, even though Bond kind of, looks at her, but never goes for it. That's another thing. The count in the book is 0, I caught.
Wow. What the... Saying right. Because you never, it may be assumed that after the fact some things happen, but there's no actual scenes in the actual book. So,
and I would say you can't assume that anything happened, because we find out that the person he intended to have a love interest with, nope, engaged, gonna get married to another guy, bye.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so but I like the little peek into his day-to-day. So that's another thing that strikes me as making this one of the better of Ian Fleming's novels, and I do recommend it, definitely. And as you said, nothing to do with the book. I did it again. Book has nothing to do with the movie, so it doesn't matter which order you catch them in. Though, one thing that I will say, as you're going through Ian Fleming's novels and deciding what to read, while the only ones you really have to read in order are the Blofeld trilogy, I strongly recommend reading the series in publication order, because there are little references in the dovetails. So at the beginning of Moonraker, for example, it mentions that he just came off the quote-unquote passionate leave that he was given at the end of Live and Let Die. And at the end of Moonraker, you'll end up leading a little bit into the next book. So if you can read them in order, it works out best, but you don't have to, except for the Blofeld trilogy. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that doesn't really lean too far back on things. I mean, other than, later on, as we discussed when we read the Blofeld trilogy, they do point out that Felix has his hook and such, but that's because of the events of Live and Let Die.
Exactly.
But you know that, so it's not like you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and that's where we get the thing where Felix is no longer a CIA agent because CIA decided, well, now that you got that hook and the leg thing, we can't use you in the field anymore, so he becomes a Pinkerton. And then later on, the CIA co-ops him again. So he flips back and forth, but it all has to do with the injuries he got in Live and Let Die. But anything more to say about Moonraker before we move on?
No, I think that about covers it. Like I said, biggest thing is don't try to compare it to the movie because it's completely different. So just go read it. It's good.
Yeah. And with that, we're going to move on to Diamonds Are Forever, which, again, has very little to do with the movie. It has more to do with the movie than Moonraker did.
Yes, there is the basic diamond smuggling plot line in the background. That, at least, was pretty much kept. But the payoff is completely different.
Yes, and I will say that for me, the best part about this book, and it's not bad. It's not my favorite out of the Ian Fleming books, but for me, the best part is the edition that I have has a giant scorpion on the cover.
Well, there you go. Always good.
And scorpions are cool. But in this particular book, what we have is we start off the same way that is familiar in the movie. We have a diamond smuggling operation, and because this is a British book, we will actually use the name De Beers when they are talking about the Diamond Company. Diamond Company and when written in all caps and De Beers are the same thing. They control 95% of the world's diamond market. That's why they can't necessarily directly advertise in the United States because of antitrust laws. But anyway, interesting thing, if you go between American television and television in another country, De Beers advertises directly in Canada and the UK, and they can't be quite as deliberate. You'll still see their name, but anyway,
it's in there somewhere. But yeah,
so you have the diamond smuggling operation, and the reason that British intelligence is brought into it is because the British government has a pretty big financial stake because the diamond market is primarily out of territories that are still in British sphere of influence, and they decide that the smuggling operation is taking enough out of the economy that it is an economic threat to the government. So that is our justification for having James Bond go in. However, instead of just, okay, we have a diamond smuggling operation, we need to see where it goes, they already kind of know where it goes, but they need to figure out each point in the pipeline in order to get things stopped. And where it goes is the American Mafia. Doesn't go to Blofeld. They're not building a giant space laser.
No giant space laser? What? Oh, man.
No, but they are going to the American Mafia just for profit. And what they need to do is they need to establish all this connection. So here we have James Bond kind of, sort of investigating. Because, of course, we all know that the way this tends to work is Bond does some investigation and half the things fall in his lap.
That's the typical. That's, pretty much the normal route that things go.
Yeah, and what were your feelings on the book?
I enjoyed it. I did enjoy the book. It was... I want to say out of these three, it was probably my least favorite, but not like dramatically so. Not like, oh, this was horrible. It didn't, for me, it was easier to read than Live and Let Die as far as you didn't have as much, blatant racism going on that made it hard to read, but it didn't flow as smoothly to me as Live and Let Die or even Moonraker did. Live and Let Die kind of smoothly flowed from one chapter to the next, just boom, 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 boom. Whereas with Moonraker, you basically had a first part and a second part, like we discussed, but it flowed together well. This one, it didn't get that extremely smooth flow that we've gotten from other books, but it wasn't bad anyway. You know what I mean? It's hard to describe. I sound like I'm like knocking on it, but it was still a good book.
I thought it was an okay book. I mean, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I'd say that by all means, I'd recommend it to any Bond fan. To a casual reader who has never picked up a Bond book this is not the first one I would tell them to pick up by any means. I agree with you that culturally it was easier to read than Live and Let Die, specifically just because we don't have Negroes every 5 seconds being thrown at us as subhuman people. I mean, that's just not cool. But we had that discussion. But at the same time, like you said, it doesn't really flow. And even though, and I think that this is one of those things that illustrates the difference between plot and story. The plot is the chain of events. Point A, point B, point C, point D, point Z. And basically those, so it's the foundation upon which things are built. And the story is the way we get from one point to another. They're two different things. And in terms of the plot for Diamonds Are Forever works very well. It all makes sense. The story, on the other hand, instead of flowing from one plot point to the next, it's more like one damn thing happens after another because it has to, because that's what the plot outline said. It just doesn't it doesn't come across as natural or narratively conversational, if you get what I mean. It's just like you said, it just kind of happens. It's there.
Yeah, it's like I said, it does flow well enough. It definitely is my least favorite of these three. But it is still, I definitely recommend reading it. Like you said, I wouldn't recommend it as the first Bond book to read. Obviously, anybody asking, I would probably recommend Casino Royale as their first Bond book to read, no matter what. But I wouldn't even put this as the second one. I would say to go through almost in the order that we've talked about them thus far. If I were to tell somebody, I'd be like, do Casino Royale, then go to the Blofeld trilogy, and then come back to the first, and then read them basically in order. Outside of that would probably be my base recommendation for somebody just starting the series.
And folks, that's how we're going to talk about them too.
Hey, it works. But yeah, I mean, and that's kind of why we're doing it in that order ourselves too, because that is what kind of how we would recommend reading them. But, this one definitely, these three books, the previous three books we talked about really were a trilogy piece. They definitely went together. Whereas with these three books, they were completely independent stories. And of the three, this was probably the weakest in story. Good plot, like you said, but weakest in storyline. I don't think, however, that it was made better with the addition of a giant space laser encrusted with diamonds. I wouldn't say that the that the movie was that much better just because of that. I think the movie played a little better as far as the story flow goes.
And I think the movie also did a better job with a couple of the characters. Actually, 3 of them. I would say that one, Tiffany Case is a much, much better character in the movie. Even though, you have a lot of people who look at her character as a flake. As we discussed in the Bond Girls episode, I don't see her that way. I see her playing the flake as a role that she uses to her advantage. I see her as a much smarter, more sophisticated character. Whereas here, she never plays the flake. She plays the character who we find out was gang raped as a child because, of course, hey, that's just considered cool character development. I don't get that. I really don't. I saw no reason for that.
The only reason that I could really apply to that was that I think he was really trying to push that, look how awesome Bond is. He can make even the worst man-hater, and even somebody who is a man-hater for darn good reason, he can still win them over because he's just that cool. And I think
now,
that's the only reason
interesting
to have that
there, I picked up on the same idea, but in a different direction, because this is another one, and Bond falls in love again. But
he seems to actually do that quite a bit in the books. I think we see that in the books more than in the movies. That he does actually love these women, But it's just that he's also able to get over it very quickly.
But every time you see it happen in the books, and it's a specific description that he goes for. I find it interesting. You went for and he can even make the most, biggest man-hater go for him anyway. I look at it as everyone he falls in love with, he first decides is quote-unquote damaged goods.
I can definitely see that. He kind of likes that Because I think he himself knows that he has his own issues, so it would make sense that he would seek out someone, who also had issues to correct.
Yeah, and he saw that in Vesper, even though he didn't know quite how bad they went. He saw that in Tracy, because remember, she had to go to rehab. He's seeing that in, of course, the formerly gang-raped daughter of a whore turned into a madam. I'm not even making that up. That is exactly how Fleming wrote the character. So he sees himself as a fixer. But of course, because Fleming is Fleming, he also has to be the first man who's had sex with her since then.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and so even though personality-wise, overtly, this version of Tiffany Case is a little bit stronger, I think that if you look at the entire picture and with the portrayal, I think that Jill St. John's version was much stronger. I prefer that character. And I also prefer, by far, the characterizations of Winton Kid.
Yeah, the Winton Kid in the movie were fantastic. In the book, they're just kind of there. They're not really anything special. They're basically just enforcers, thugs. They're not the cold, calculating hitmen with wisecracks that you get in the in the movie.
And honestly, I thought the wart thing was just gross.
Yeah, I can agree.
And so, in terms of characters, beyond that, you don't really get much out of this, because what you have, and it became a distraction, really. M is talking about how this is going to go into the American mob, specifically a faction called the Spangled Mob, which I think Fleming was trying to give America a lot more credit, because the only spangled Americans most usually know is the Star Spangled Banner, and they don't even know what the word means. It's just the title of the song. And hey, I'm just telling the truth here, folks. I'm not trying to knock you down. It's just how it is.
At least he did explain where they got the name from. The actual name of the brothers that run it, their last name is Spang. So that's where they get it from, as opposed to pulling it from the American flag. But,
Yeah, and he goes on to great lengths to have M say, now, I know you think you've dealt with some tough people in the past. He only fought in World War II against the Nazis. He's fought against Russian Smersh, and so on and so forth. But these are truly dangerous characters. They're the worst you'll ever have faced. Ever! And I think M harped on that too much. It got tiresome really fast. I mean, I got sick of reading that. I was just like, shut up. Shut up!
Like, we get it, they're bad people. All right, moving along.
And then, honestly, I thought they played as punks. I did not find them dangerous at all. They were just, to me, they were common thugs. They weren't particularly smart. They weren't particularly dangerous compared to anything else he's faced. I mean, yeah, of course, because this is Bond in a book as opposed to in a movie. He gets captured. He gets the living shit beat out of him, and he doesn't actually... bring things down himself. In the end, Tiffany ends up saving everybody's bacon. I mean, he of course has to be the gallant hero for the woman later, but in terms of the actual plot of things, again, he doesn't solve it. He is there to help put it together, but he doesn't fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. They tried to push it down our throats that these guys were so awesomely bad, but they didn't back it up with the actual action. They ended up just being, essentially common criminals. I mean, they were higher up common criminals, but still pretty much just common criminals when it came down to it, and not especially inspired ones at that. So, yeah, it's just a kind of basic.
And there really weren't any surprises. Like, honestly, as soon as you heard how the mud bath went, were you at all surprised what happened in there? Did you not see it coming?
No, I definitely think that was fairly straightforward. It was just kind of, it wasn't, I think it was intending, it seems like when he was writing it, he was intending for that to be like shocking, but it really wasn't.
And it was nice to see Felix again. This is where we first find out that Felix has become a Pinkerton. But wow, he shows up really conveniently. Because previously when we met him, his appearances made sense. It never felt contrived. Whereas here, Bond accidentally runs into Felix when Felix sees Bond dealing with a member of the Spangled Mob, whom he happens to be surveilling for the Pinkertons because of horse race fixing. And Felix gets the drop on Bond. And so then we have this distraction at a horse race. And then, I'm sorry, the scene where Felix picks them up in the car in Vegas, just God in the machine, anybody? So, like you said, it's not a bad effort. I think you thought more highly of the book than I did, but I don't hate it. But this is definitely, to me, fluff reading. This isn't even stronger or interesting adventure reading. This is total fluff. As far as I read it, I would put this in the definite mediocre category.
Yeah, I would put it probably in the upper mediocre category, but still definitely one of the lower tiers of Fleming's writing. It is just it's an easy read. It's not going to, stress you out, brain-wise. You're not going to hurt your head trying to read this, but it's definitely not up to par with the previous 2 books or previous 3 books, if you go back to Casino Royale as well. It's just kind of there. And it could make you start to worry. It's like, okay, is it tailing off here? Has he, get 4 books into the series? Is he out of ideas? Is he out of the power that makes Bond what Bond is? And I guess we'll find out the next episode we do talking about books, huh?
I guess we will. So, anything more that you had for Diamonds Are Forever?
I was trying to think if there was anything. I was just kind of trying to think back. I think we pretty much, like you said, this book is fairly forgettable because of its mediocrity, because of its just kind of blandness, so to speak. It is fairly forgettable. There are some good scenes. There are some good tension. There are some good drama moments, but for the most part, it's just kind of there, and then it's not, and you're done with it, and you're not any worse off for having read it, but you're definitely not any better off either.
Yeah, and I also think it continues past its own ending a little bit far. I personally found the cruise ship thing to drag on a bit. I don't think it just wasn't tight. I don't think it was. And it's odd because at the very beginning of the book, he's so descriptive with the scorpion under the rock getting its prey, waiting, and how that metamorphoses into the meeting of the first leg in the pipeline for smuggling. And there's so much rich detail, and yet it gets so lazy. And it's not a very consistent book either. So, again, if you're a Bond fan, go for it. If you're first getting into the series, don't start here. So that's my thoughts on Diamonds Are Forever. I think that covers it for all 3 of our books. Any last thoughts?
No, that pretty much sums it up for me as well. Definitely recommend reading all 3, of course. If you're a Bond fan, or even if you're just a fan of action-adventure literature, definitely check out Live and Let Die and Moonraker if you haven't yet. Or if you haven't, it's been a while, go back and reread it. And as we pointed out earlier, don't forget that you can contact us. We welcome your comments, your questions. We want to know if you disagree with us. We want to know if you agree with us. We just want to hear from you. So hit us up on our Facebook page at facebook.com/HerMajesty'sPod. Follow us on Twitter at HerMajesty'sPod. And visit our website at HerMajesty'sPod.com. And you can always post your comments right on the episode pages, or email me, Eric, at foureyedradio.com, or email Ziggy.
Yep, you can email me at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. You can also find me on Twitter at cinemaotr. And coming up on our next episode, it's one we've been waiting for quite a while. It is our Henchman episode, where we will be announcing the winner of our Dial-A-Henchman contest. We will be reading the winning entry from that contest, along with a few runners-up and an honorable mention. And then we will be discussing the henchmen of the 007 films, the top and, of course, the bottom-tier henchmen. So hope you'll be looking forward to that. In the meantime, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.
This has been another great presentation by the Four Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at foureyedradio.com.